Right now, over $20 billion in Canadian exports are staring down a 50% tariff wall. And Mark Carney just made a move Washington didn't see coming. Two neighbors, one deadline, and a bet that could reshape how this trade war ends. Today, we break down exactly why. Before we begin, subscribe for more in-depth political and economic analysis every week. Trump thought tariffs would force Canada to give in. Instead, Carney quietly made one move that changed the entire negotiation, and almost nobody noticed it. Here's how we got here. Carney had only been prime minister a few months, sworn in during March 2025, when Trump's tariff war landed squarely in his lap. Since early 2025, Trump has hit Canada with tariff after tariff, and every time, Canada hit back just as hard. A quarter of Canadian goods got taxed crossing the border. Ottawa answered with roughly $30 billion in counter tariffs of its own, targeting American wine, dairy, and other consumer goods. American wine imports into Canada practically collapsed overnight, dropping more than 80%. Then came the auto tariffs, and the damage stopped being abstract. Stellantis idled its Windsor plant, and 3,200 workers lost their jobs in a single decision. The plant had built vehicles for both the Canadian and American markets for decades, which is exactly why the tariff math broke it. Parts and partially assembled vehicles routinely crossed the border several times before a finished car rolled off the line. And every crossing under the new tariffs added costs the plant simply couldn't absorb. Local suppliers, dealerships, and the small businesses around the Windsor plant felt the ripple within weeks, not years. Carney's response stayed blunt through it all. Canada would hold the line. By July 2026, Trump raised the stakes further than ever. A 50% tariff, this time on goods that were supposed to be protected under North America's own trade agreement, after the U.S. chose not to renew it earlier that month. That non-renewal mattered more than it sounded. Instead of the deal simply continuing automatically, it triggered a 10-year cycle of annual reviews, meaning the terms of North American trade were now back on the table every single year. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra pointed out that Ottawa had already offered to double its oil exports to the United States as part of ongoing negotiations. The new tariffs target roughly $20 billion in Canadian exports, hitting Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia the hardest. Canada's premiers gathered in Charlottetown to plan a coordinated national response, but they weren't completely united. Doug Ford pushed for withholding Canadian potash and oil, taking a much tougher approach. Other premiers preferred slowing things down and keeping negotiations at the center of Canada's strategy. That difference mattered because every province faced different risks. Ontario depended heavily on autos. Alberta relied on energy exports. Quebec worried about aluminum. British Columbia faced pressure on its lumber industry. Carney had to keep the country united while negotiating with Washington. British Columbia's premier summed it up simply. The sooner this dispute ends, the better for everyone involved. Carney insisted that nothing was off the table, but he continued framing Canada's strategy as negotiation first, with retaliation kept in reserve. And that's when Carney made the move almost nobody in Washington saw coming. This wasn't Canada's first clash with China. Back in 2024, Canada matched American policy by imposing a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, along with a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum. China answered with its own tariffs on Canadian canola oil, canola meal, pork, and seafood. Then, in January 2026, things changed. Canada allowed up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into its market under a much lower tariff. In return, China eased duties on Canadian canola and other agricultural exports. It wasn't a free trade agreement. Carney made that absolutely clear. Canada had no intention of signing one with China, and under the USMCA, none of the three member countries could sign such an agreement without notifying the others first. But Trump reacted as if Canada had crossed a major red line. He threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if Canada made a deal with China. He warned that Canada could become a backdoor for Chinese products entering the United States. On social media, he even claimed China would eat Canada alive, while once again calling Carney governor, the same nickname he had previously used for Justin Trudeau.
Trump also removed Canada's invitation to his Board of Peace initiative, signaling that Canada's relationship with Washington was becoming tied to its trade decisions. The real turning point came during Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Without mentioning Trump by name, Carney warned that countries not sitting at the negotiating table could quickly find themselves on the menu. He argued that middle powers needed to work together as larger countries increasingly used economic integration as a political weapon. That speech sent a clear message. This wasn't just another trade dispute. It was becoming a contest over influence, alliances, and economic leverage.
This is where Carney's strategy became genuinely risky. Nearly 75% of Canada's exports still go to the United States. If Trump had actually imposed a blanket 100% tariff instead of simply threatening it, Canada would have taken the biggest economic hit. Carney was betting that Trump's threats were negotiating leverage, rather than a policy he truly intended to carry out. So far, that gamble has worked, but it easily could have gone the other way. Carney never backed away from the China arrangement. He simply refused to escalate it into something larger. That restraint defines Carney's entire approach. Before entering politics, he led both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He treats tariffs the same way a central banker treats financial crises. Stay calm, calculate the risks, then make your move. Trump, meanwhile, kept changing course. Tariff rates shifted from 25% to 35% and then to 50%. For businesses trying to invest across the border, that uncertainty became just as expensive as the tariffs themselves. Some Canadian provinces still refused to return American alcohol to store shelves, while many consumers began choosing Canadian-made products whenever possible. Then, on July 21st, 2026, Trump and Carney finally spoke directly. Both sides agreed to intensify negotiations before the 50% tariff deadline. Nothing was resolved, but the door to a deal remained open. From here, there are only two realistic paths. Either both governments reach a compromise that allows each leader to claim victory at home, or the trade war continues. Tariffs remain in place, supply chains suffer even more, and consumers on both sides pay the price. The biggest lesson is simple. Trade wars rarely produce clear winners. Carney's strategy has never been about winning headlines. It's been about quietly building leverage, keeping negotiations alive, and positioning Canada for the long game. Whether that strategy succeeds won't be decided by this week's headlines. It will be decided by the next rounds of negotiations. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.